Hello, it's Father David Nix on the Padre Peregrino podcast, and many of you know the news from Florida this weekend. There was a woman who approached Holy Communion. A 66-year-old priest named Father Rodriguez was holding a ciborium, and there was some altercation. She reached in, crushed a bunch of the host that is the body, blood, soul, and divinity of Jesus Christ, and in defense of this, Father Rodriguez bit her forearm, and he was charged by police. I'm not sure the backstory on this, so I'm not going to go too deep into it, but it appears she might be in an alternative relationship. It appears both of them may have been at that first Mass. Words were exchanged between the two Masses, between Father Rodriguez and the woman. She did say something I saw on Catholic News Agency about not feeling worthy to approach. And then apparently at the actual Mass where this intense event took place, there may have even been words as she approached Father Rodriguez. Now, I said today on Twitter, I do not think this would be very likely. It could, but it wouldn't be very likely at the traditional Latin Mass for a couple reasons. One is when you're receiving, you're on your knees, so anything out of the ordinary, you'd be identified. And secondly, the priest has the protection of an altar rail and often many male acolytes. So I don't think this would happen. At least you have a much less chance of this happening at the traditional Latin Mass. The other thing I said on Twitter is that even if a priest has to resort to like kicking someone away, I didn't think biting was appropriate. People pile on me, said, well, you're second guessing him. You don't know what you would have done in that situation. Well, I do know I wouldn't have bit him, but okay, enough people pile on me. Maybe I'm wrong about that. But I'll say this video actually isn't about the traditional Latin Mass versus the Novus Ordo, and it's not, I can't believe I even have to say this. This isn't about kicking or biting, kicking versus biting someone who's attacking the Eucharist. I want to talk rather the much bigger scope of Eucharistic protection and practices that we can work on in the Catholic Church in America. So I've told this story before, but I've been a priest 14 years. I did the new Mass, that's the Mass in English, Spanish, Portuguese, etc. for the first 7 years. The last 7 years I've been doing the Latin Mass. And about 5 years after my ordination as a priest, I asked the auxiliary bishop of Denver, and he's now a ordinary somewhere else, but he was the interim bishop, as well as a priest who taught at the seminary, as well as a pastor in Fort Collins, how many people in this diocese receive Holy Communion in a state of mortal sin every Sunday. Now, none of them got into, well, for it to be mortal, it has to be grave, plus full knowledge and full consent of the will. They all knew I was past that. I think you guys are past that too. Because you can Google any of these sins, any common grave sins. You can just Google and see, are they grave or venial? And so once you have the ability to Google, you can't claim invincible ignorance. So let's just call grave sins mortal sins for the most part, if you're in the Western Hemisphere. Okay, but all of the moral theology aside, well, no, moral theology ties into this. So I asked this bishop and then two priests, and I mentioned where they work so you don't think they're as extreme as me. Well, all three of them, again to this question, what percentage of Catholics on Sunday in this diocese, in this archdiocese, do you think receive Holy Communion every Sunday in a state of mortal sin? And they all said, without any corroboration between the three of them, 80%. 80% was their answer. Now that's a showstopper. I think that should be in like the diocesan newspaper and on the websites and basically everything you can to get people to receive Holy Communion in a state of grace. Do you realize how serious it is to not receive communion in grace? St. Vincent Ferrer said, receiving communion in a state of sin is like flushing the Eucharist down the toilet. I don't even like to say those two words in the same sentence, but he's a saint who said that, and he said it to drive home to anybody in the 13th century in Spain who would dare do that. It was very, very few people that would dare do it, but occasionally a fiery preacher like Saint Vincent Ferrer would have to preach something like that, and he did. So what does that mean? If this archdiocese is like every diocese coast to coast, which I think it is, that means like 1 million hosts are given out every Sunday to people, if not in mortal sin, at least in grave sin every Sunday. So if the equivalent of 1 million hosts are being flushed down the toilet every Sunday in this country by people receiving in sin, then why are we talking about biting one more of those? See, this isn't about Father Rodriguez. I think that's where I messed up on Twitter, making it look like this was me judging Father Rodriguez. What I'm trying to say is there's a much bigger issue here, that we are way into the 11th hour on Eucharistic sacrilege in this country, and a priest biting the forearm of a woman is just the very tip of the iceberg, of an iceberg that has not been tackled by the U.S. bishops. That's the bigger issue right here. If you look in Redemptionis Sacramentum, that's the 2004 document written by Cardinal Lorenzi, signed by Pope John Paul II. Notice that's not the 1604 document, that's a 2004 document. This is the post-Vatican II rules for the post-Vatican II liturgy. And in that, a priest is permitted to eradicate Eucharistic ministers. I don't mean terminate them. I mean, he is not required to use them if they're going to be sloppy, if they're going to be careless. The priest is allowed to say everyone has to receive communion on the tongue if there's any danger. He's even allowed to retract the precious blood if there's any danger. That's all in Redemptionis Sacramentum. In fact, I think it's number 84. The priest is encouraged to make an announcement on worthy communion if there's an indiscriminate approach to the altar. Just do a search on Redemptionis Sacramentum for the word indiscriminate, and it will show up twice. It's the second of two. And anytime there's an indiscriminate approach to the altar, which is, 98% of the parishes in the United States, the priest is allowed to make an announcement on worthy reception of Holy Communion. So the bigger issue here today isn't Father Rodriguez biting the forearm of a woman who might be in an alternative relationship. The bigger issue is, why does everyone, Catholic or not Catholic, think they have a right to approach Holy Communion in the first place? And the answer is because not just catechesis. Everyone wants to say it's catechesis. That's a part of it. But people learn through what they see, do, hear, smell, taste, what they see around them. And everything that they've seen around them for 60 years is that the Eucharist is just treated as barely special bread. And so we are in this 11th hour of debates on, is it okay to bite someone's forearm if they grab the Eucharist, without realizing we priests and bishops have dropped the ball entirely on even post-Vatican II rules written by Cardinal Lorenzi, signed by Pope John Paul II, for the Novus Ordo for Eucharistic protection. Almost all those rules are being ignored, and this ties in to this fact that 80% of Catholics are receiving Holy Communion, if not a state of mortal sin, at least grave sin. And so what we saw in Florida, that's just a symptom of this underlying cause that really has to be tackled. So that's what I was trying to say on Twitter, but you only have so many characters to say it, that all this is a symptom, not a cause. And we have to get back to teaching worthy reception of Holy Communion. If I can give one more plug for the traditional Latin Mass, that's extremely easy to see in the Latin Mass, because it's what you see, it's what you feel, it's what you even smell through the incense, it's what you see in how men have suits on, women have veils and long dresses. You know you're at somewhere different from, a mega church. So all of this is downstream. All of this Father Rodriguez arm stuff is downstream of the bigger issues that very few people want to talk about. But let's make reparation for the million hosts that were given out this last weekend to those not in grace. And let us stay in grace, for any of us can fall into sin, so that we can receive the body, blood, soul, and divinity of Jesus in a worthy manner. God bless you.